The house was silent when Andrew's parents handed me a contract and demanded that I sign it, declaring that all of my assets would belong to his family. They laughed and said it was just a formality, but I felt something was wrong. I smiled, but deep down, I could sense an impending threat. I met Andrew 5 years ago in New York, when I was still grinding my way up in my career, a 28-year-old woman with big dreams, working at a small but promising interior design firm. He entered my life like a gust of wind, a tall guy with naturally messy blonde hair, a smile that could melt hearts, and the kind of confidence that came from someone born with everything. We came from two completely different worlds. I grew up in a middle-class family in Ohio, where my parents taught me that everything had to be earned through hard work. Andrew, on the other hand, was the golden boy of an elite family in Connecticut, where money and status were a way of life. But back then, I didn't care about those differences. He told me stories of traveling across Europe and extravagant parties, and I told him about summers spent helping my dad fix cars in the garage. I believed in our love. I believed that the heart could transcend all boundaries, that Andrew saw me, my true self, not just my background. I was wrong. As time went on, cracks started to show, small but sharp like blades. Andrew's family never truly accepted me. The first time I met them, I wore a simple blue dress that I loved and brought a box of homemade cookies to make a good impression. Margaret, his mother, looked me up and down and said with a faint smile, "Oh, you made these yourself? How?" Adorable. Her voice was sweet, but her eyes were icy cold, as if I were a cheap trinket unworthy of her dinner table. Victor, meanwhile, patted Andrew on the shoulder and laughed. "You picked someone who knows how to take care of things," as if I were a hired help, not his son's partner. From that moment, I slowly realized. To them, I would always be temporary, a girl unworthy of their lineage, an outsider who would never truly fit in. Margaret was the root of everything. She was a powerful and controlling woman, with silver hair always tied in a bun, dressed in expensive outfits, and wearing a heavy perfume that screamed status. Every decision in Andrew's life went through her, from what he studied at Yale to where he worked, even which apartment we rented when we moved in together. Once, I suggested buying a new sofa, something simple but comfortable. Andrew nodded in agreement, but that evening he called his mother. The next day, a glossy, expensive leather sofa appeared at our door. Margaret had chosen it, and Andrew just laughed. Mom knows what's best. I swallowed my frustration, but every time something like that happened, I felt smaller, like my opinion didn't matter to him at all. Andrew never opposed his mother, not once. He always sided with her, no matter what. I remember one evening when I asked about our holiday plans, and he absent-mindedly replied, "Mom wants us to come home this weekend," so I said yes. I interrupted, "But I already booked a place in the Catskills." He shrugged, avoiding my eyes. "Mom really wants us to visit." I stood there, gripping the edge of the table, feeling like I wasn't his partner, but just a shadow next to the towering presence of Margaret. He never stood up for me, never told his mother she was wrong, never included me in important decisions. He left me alone in moments I needed him the most, and every time, it broke my heart a little more. Andrew's manipulative behavior didn't stop with pleasing his mother. He had borrowed money from me several times, $500 to help a friend, then $20,000 because the company's going through a tough time. Every time I asked about it, he had a perfectly reasonable excuse. "I'll pay you back soon, don't worry." Or, "It's nothing big, you trust me, right?" But the money never came back. I told myself he was just struggling, that love meant being understanding. But then things escalated. One day, he pulled me into the living room, eyes gleaming. "Can you put this house under your name for me? The bank is giving me a hard time over some paperwork, but if you sign, everything will go through." I hesitated. "But this is the house you bought. Why do I need to sign for it?" He smiled and hugged me. "Because I trust you. We're one, remember?" I agreed, full of doubt, because I wanted to believe in him. But looking back now, I realized that wasn't trust. That was the first step in his plan to trap me in a scheme I never saw coming. Those little details, the unpaid loans, the decisions steered by Margaret, the way he pushed me into putting my name on things, gradually pieced together into a terrifying picture. I started to see that this relationship wasn't healthy, not the love I had dreamed of. Andrew was no longer the gentleman I met in New York. He was a puppet for his family, and in his eyes, I was merely a tool. I tried to talk to him, but every time I brought something up, he brushed it off. "You're being too sensitive," or "My family just wants what's best for us." I stayed quiet, but deep down, I knew I was being manipulated, little by little. And if I didn't act soon, I would lose everything, not just my money, but myself. I'll never forget that night, a Saturday evening at Victor and Margaret's grand house in Greenwich, where polished wooden walls and the scent of fine wine filled the air. They had invited me to dinner, and I had hoped it would be a chance to get closer to Andrew's family, to prove that I wasn't the temporary girl they thought I was. I wore a sleek black dress, brought a carefully selected bottle of red wine from a local shop, and told myself that this time, things would be different. But from the moment I stepped inside, I felt the stiffness in the air, unlike our previous meetings, when at least they put on a friendly facade. Victor sat at the head of the table, wine glass in hand, eyes sharp and scrutinizing my every move. Margaret was busy instructing the house staff, but I caught her glancing at me from the corner of her eye, her thin smile filled with hidden meaning. Andrew sat beside me, but he said little, merely nodding whenever his parents spoke, more an observer than a participant. Dinner had barely begun. We were still on the appetizer, a fragrant pumpkin soup I struggled to swallow as my stomach churned with a sense of dread, when Margaret stood up. She walked over to a wooden cabinet in the dining room, pulled out a sheet of paper that looked eerily like the contract I had seen at home the night before, and placed it in front of me with a motion both graceful and commanding. "Sarah, go ahead and sign," she said sweetly, her voice cold as ice. "We've already discussed this. It's just a formality to make everything clear." I looked down at the contract, lines upon lines about assets, ownership, and my heart began to pound. Victor chimed in, laughing. "Don't worry, sweetheart. It's just family business. You're about to become one of us." I turned to Andrew, hoping for an explanation, a protective gesture, or at least a reassuring look from the man I had loved for 5 years. But he just sat there, hands clasped under the table, a weak smile on his lips, as if this were all perfectly normal. "Andrew," I whispered, my voice trembling, "say something." He shrugged, eyes fixed on his plate. "Mom's right, Sarah. It's just paperwork. Don't make it a big deal." His words cut deep, not because of what he said, but because of how he said it, calm, emotionless, like I was some fool who didn't understand the rules of his family. I looked around the table. Victor nodded with satisfaction. Margaret smiled with smug triumph, and I felt like I was sitting in the middle of a pack of wolves, with Andrew being the one who led me into their den. That moment, I knew for certain this wasn't a misunderstanding or a formality, as they claimed. This was a trap, carefully set long ago. That contract wasn't meant to protect their family. It was designed to take everything from me, from the savings I'd built over the years, to the apartment I had put under my name for Andrew. I felt the blood rush to my head, my hands trembling as I held the papers, but I didn't let them see my panic. I took a deep breath, forced a strained smile, and said, "I need to consult with a lawyer first. Something this serious, I can't sign without legal advice." Margaret frowned, her smile tightening. "A lawyer? You don't trust us?" Victor gave a dry chuckle. "Come on, Sarah. Don't make this complicated. We're family." But the way they emphasized the word family only confirmed one thing for me. They didn't see me as family. They saw me as prey. I was about to stand up, using the excuse of getting water to buy time, when the doorbell rang. The entire room seemed to freeze. Victor frowned, Margaret turned her head, and Andrew finally looked up, a flicker of unease in his eyes. The housekeeper opened the door, and in walked Sophie, my personal attorney, carrying a folder in one hand, her heels clicking rhythmically on the hardwood floor. I was the one who had called her earlier. "Sorry I'm late," Sophie said, her tone calm but sharp. "Sarah asked me to review a few important documents." The entire Andrew family went silent. Victor put his wine glass down with a loud clink against the wood. Margaret shot up from her chair. "Who are you?" "Who let you in?" Sophie smiled coolly, unfazed. "I'm Sarah's lawyer." and I'm here to make sure she's not pressured into signing anything she doesn't fully understand." The air in the room froze. Andrew looked at me, truly looked at me, for the first time that night, his gaze no longer calm but filled with shock and a hint of fear. "Sarah, what are you doing?" he stammered. I didn't answer. I just held his eyes, letting him see that I was no longer the naive girl he used to know. Margaret stepped forward, her voice sharp and high-pitched. "This is a private family matter," Sophie responded, opening her briefcase. "If it's a family matter, why are you asking Sarah to sign away all of her assets?" "I think we need to clarify this right now." Victor slammed his hand on the table. "Enough. You need to get out." But Sophie didn't budge, and I stood up, my voice calm but firm as steel. "No, she stays. And I'm not signing anything until I understand everything." The reason for Sophie's presence was a chilling discovery I made by accident. The afternoon before, while I was tidying Andrew's desk in our shared Brooklyn apartment, a rare thing since he always said, "Let me handle it myself," I stumbled across a clutter of papers and found a rushed message from Margaret to Andrew. "Prepare the contract." Short, but enough to knock the breath out of me. "Andrew, tell her it's just a formality. Don't let her suspect. Once she signs, the assets are ours." I stood there, hands trembling as I held the paper, my head spinning like I was caught in a storm. This wasn't coincidence. It was a plan, a long-standing scheme. I immediately called Sophie, my close friend who had become a well-known lawyer. My voice choked. "Sophie, I need you right now. They're trying to take everything from me." She didn't ask much, just replied, "I'll be there." "Don't do anything, Sarah." That very moment led me to the fateful dinner, with Sophie as the secret card I had up my sleeve. After that tense night at Victor and Margaret's, when Sophie arrived and disrupted their plan, I knew I couldn't stop. I needed the truth, all of it, and fast, before they could come up with another trap. Sophie and I started investigating Andrew's finances the very next day. We sat in her small Manhattan office, fluorescent lights flickering overhead, cold coffee on the desk. Sophie flipped through stacks of bank documents she had accessed through her contacts, her voice calm but laced with tension. "Sarah, you won't believe this. What we found made my skin crawl. Andrew wasn't just in debt. He was teetering on the edge of bankruptcy. Multiple personal loans, maxed out credit cards, shady transactions with shell companies. It was all there, hidden from me for 5 whole years." I stared at the glaring red numbers on the screen, feeling the floor collapse beneath me. "How did he do all this without me knowing?" I whispered, gripping the edge of the desk. Sophie placed a hand on my shoulder. "Because he's good at hiding things, Sarah. And because you trusted him." But that wasn't the worst of it. Sophie dug deeper, and we discovered that Andrew had a second identity, a fake name he used to borrow money from underground lenders in Jersey. I sat there, eyes fixed on a forged ID with his face, but the name James Carter, feeling like I was staring at a stranger. "Is this the man I loved?" I asked myself, my voice barely audible in my own head. Sophie looked at me, her eyes serious. "Sarah, you weren't the woman he loved. You were his financial exit strategy, you and that contract." Her words hit like a punch to the chest, but they also woke me up. I wasn't just betrayed emotionally. I was used, turned into a tool to rescue him from his own ruin. I felt anger, shame, but also a fire igniting inside me. I would not stay a victim forever. I decided to find Clara, a name that had appeared vaguely in some of Andrew's messages months ago. He had once told me she was an old colleague, but my instinct said otherwise. I reached out to her through an old social media account Sophie tracked down, and after a short, hesitant call, Clara agreed to meet me at a small cafe in Queens. When she walked in, a slim woman with curly brown hair, tired yet sharp eyes, I knew instantly she, too, was part of this story. We sat across from each other, 2 steaming lattes between us, and she told me everything. "Andrew promised he'd marry me," Clara said, her voice tight with emotion. "But after I refused to wire him $10,000 for some investment, he vanished. I later found out he had tricked me into signing for a loan, and it took me nearly a year to get out of it." I looked at her and saw myself in her story, a woman who believed in love, only to be exploited. "He did it to you too, didn't he?" Clara asked. I nodded, tears threatening but held back. "We're not the first," she said, clutching her coffee cup. "And we won't be the last if he doesn't get stopped." Clara and I, two victims of the same con artist, decided to join forces. Sophie became our legal backbone, and over the next 2 weeks, we worked tirelessly to gather evidence. I dug through every email, text message, and piece of paper I had ever kept from Andrew. Things I once thought meaningless now turned into weapons. Sophie contacted a private investigator who uncovered more of Andrew's illegal dealings, from laundering money through a shell company to forging my signature on several bank documents. Clara brought in receipts and messages from her time with him, proving that he had repeated the same tactics. Every piece of evidence was like a brick building the wall that would crush him, and I could feel my strength returning. "We're going to expose him," I told Clara late one night as we sat surrounded by documents in the apartment I had just rented. She nodded, her eyes lighting up. Not just him, his whole family too. The tension rose each day as I realized the scale of this betrayal. Andrew hadn't acted alone. Margaret and Victor were the masterminds, the ones who taught him how to manipulate, how to conceal, how to turn others into puppets. I remembered Margaret's smug look as she placed the contract in front of me, Victor's pat on my shoulder, as if I were a well-trained dog deserving praise. They didn't just want my money, they wanted control. They wanted to prove I'd never be their equal. But they underestimated me. With Sophie and Clara by my side, I was no longer the naive girl who had once walked into their home with a bottle of wine and a timid smile. I was ready for the next step, the final confrontation that would destroy their entire scheme. On the night I prepared for that battle, I stood in front of the mirror in my small apartment, wearing a long black coat, my hair tied high, and whispered to myself, "They think I'm weak, but they're wrong." Sophie had arranged everything. The evidence had been copied, the police attorneys were notified, and Clara had agreed to join me at Andrew's next family dinner. I didn't just want to protect myself. I wanted them to pay. I wanted them to see that I wasn't the easy prey they believed I was. The tension inside me hit its peak, but it wasn't fear, it was adrenaline, the thrill of someone about to reclaim everything. That dinner wouldn't just be a family gathering, it would be Judgment Day, and I was ready to turn it into Andrew's and his family's worst nightmare. They never saw it coming. After days of relentless investigation with Sophie and Clara, I, Sarah, was ready for the final act of the plan we had so carefully prepared. I knew Andrew and his family wouldn't stop after the night Sophie disrupted their scheme with the contract. They'd find a way to cover it up, to pretend nothing had happened. But I had enough evidence in my hands, and I decided to strike at the family dinner Andrew was hosting with Kate, his newly engaged fiancée. It was a cold evening in Connecticut, wind howling through the dry trees outside the large windows of Victor and Margaret's house. I didn't announce myself. I simply appeared, with Clara and Sophie at my side like two indispensable allies. As the housekeeper opened the door, I heard the lively laughter from the dining room, glasses clinking in celebration, as if everything was still perfect in their world. I wore my long black coat, clutching the folder full of truths Clara and I had unearthed over the past 2 weeks, my heart pounding with the adrenaline of the moment to come. Clara stood beside me, her eyes burning with the same resolve she'd had when she first told me about Andrew's betrayal, and Sophie whispered, "Let's go, Sarah. Let's end this now." We stepped in, and it was as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. Andrew was mid-story, wine glass in hand, but when he saw me, he froze, the wine nearly spilling onto the table. Kate, a blonde girl with an innocent smile, looked at me, then turned to Andrew, her voice uncertain. "Who is she, Andrew?" Margaret shot up, her voice sharp and high, trying to overpower my presence. "Sarah, what are you doing here? This is not a place you can just walk into." Victor bellowed, his face flushed red. "Get out right now. Don't ruin our evening." But I didn't flinch. I walked to the center of the room, placed the folder firmly on the dining table with a loud thud, and stared straight into Andrew's eyes. "I'm here to tell the truth about you, your family, and the trap you set for Clara and me." Clara stepped forward, her voice cold but piercing. "Andrew, remember me? The woman you promised to marry, then vanished from after I wouldn't give you 10 grand? The air was tight, like a string stretched to its breaking point. I opened the folder and pulled out the documents, one stack at a time, in the exact order Sophie had arranged, so my blow would be undeniable. Andrew isn't who he pretends to be, Kate. I began, my voice calm but razor sharp. He's hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt to banks and to underground organizations in Jersey. Here's the proof. I tossed copies of the bank transactions onto the table. The glaring red figures Sophie and I had uncovered now lit up under the chandelier. He used a false identity, James Carter, to scam money, and here's the paperwork to prove it, I continued, sliding the second stack toward Kate. Her hands trembled as she picked it up, her eyes widening in horror as she read the unfamiliar name beside Andrew's photo. He stammered, "Sarah, you're crazy." "That's fake." But I didn't let him interrupt. "And this," I said, my voice rising across the room, "is the contract you and your family tried to force me to sign to steal everything I've worked for over the past 5 years. You never loved me, Andrew. You used me to save your collapsing empire of debt." Margaret lunged forward, trying to snatch the papers from Kate's hands. "Don't listen to her. She's making it up." But Sophie stepped in, her voice ringing like a verdict. "Making it up? These are verified bank records, obtained by a private investigator and the police. I got them from Andrew's own hidden transactions. Should I call them in right now, Mrs. Margaret?" Victor slammed the table, knocking over his wine glass. The deep red spilled across the tablecloth. "Shut up. You have no right," he roared. But I met his eyes, unflinching. "I do have the right, because I'm your victim. And so is Clara." Clara spoke up then, her voice choked but steady, like when she told me her story in that cafe. "You promised to marry me, Andrew, then abandoned me when I wouldn't give you $10,000. I spent a year paying off the debt you dumped on me. Kate, you're next if you don't walk away now." Andrew's whole family fell silent. Kate dropped the documents, tears streaking down her face as she turned to Andrew. "Is it true? Say something." But he hung his head, hands trembling around his wine glass, silent, his silence louder than any confession. Margaret screamed, her voice cracking with panic. "Don't believe them, Kate. We are a respected family. No one dares come after us." But I laughed coldly. "Respected? Is this your definition of respectable?" I threw the final stack of documents on the table, proof of the legal transactions Sophie and the investigator had uncovered. Money laundering through shell companies, forged signatures, and fraudulent loans. "The police are waiting outside," Sophie added, holding up her phone. "They want to speak with Andrew about financial fraud, identity theft, and loan scams." Police sirens blared outside, drowning out Margaret's shrieks. Andrew shot up, trying to run, but 2 officers walked in, handcuffs ready. "Andrew Grayson, you're under arrest." He turned to me, eyes bloodshot, voice desperate. "Sarah, how could you do this to me? I loved you." I looked at him with no pity. "Love me? You loved my money. Don't confuse the two." He was led away in cuffs, his screams echoing down the hallway, but no one cared. Kate sobbed, covering her face as she left the table, the diamond engagement ring on her hand now utterly meaningless. Margaret collapsed into her chair, clutching her chest, her face pale like she'd lost the very world she once controlled. Victor mumbled something about calling the family lawyer, but his eyes were blank. He knew they had lost. Andrew didn't just lose his reputation, he lost everything. The police raided the house shortly after, seizing all related documents, and I heard he was facing multiple charges that could lock him away for years. His family crumbled before my eyes. Margaret, once the queen of silent manipulation, now just a trembling shadow. Victor, once proud of his elite bloodline, now facing a public scandal splashed across headlines. Kate walked away, carrying pain, yes, but also a chance to escape the trap Clara and I had once fallen into. That night, as I walked out of the house in the rain, Clara grabbed my hand. "We did it, Sarah." Sophie patted my back. "You're stronger than they ever thought." But I knew this wasn't the end. I had torn them down, exposed the truth, but I wanted more. I wanted to rise from the wreckage, not just for revenge, but to reclaim my life. Next week, I'll start over, protect my assets, build a future without Andrew or his family shadow. They thought I was easy prey, but I'll show them I'm a survivor. And I won't give them a second chance to crush me. This story deserves a fitting ending. Not just their downfall, but my rise. And I'll write it myself, one step at a time, stronger than ever before. The following week, I returned to Sophie's office to finalize the legal procedures. With her help, I reclaimed all of my assets. The savings I had worked so hard for, staying late nights at the design firm, were now safely out of his reach. Sophie sat across from me, typing away, then looked up and smiled. "You're in the clear, Sarah. No more ties to them." I nodded, but deep inside, I knew this victory wasn't just about money. It was about no longer being controlled by people who once dismissed my worth. I didn't need revenge by dragging out their pain. They did that to themselves. Andrew now sat behind bars, facing a long sentence for fraud and deceit. Margaret and Victor lost the upper-class reputation they once flaunted. Now reduced to gossip and parties they were no longer invited to. I didn't need to do anything more. They had already fallen. Clara started over too. I met her one afternoon at our old cafe in Queens, where we had once shared our stories. She wore a beige sweater, holding a cup of latte, and her smile now reached her eyes. "I opened a little flower shop," she said, her voice soft but proud. "It's not big, but it's mine." I looked at her and saw the same light in her eyes that I now felt in myself, the light of someone who had been crushed but got back up again. "You changed me, Sarah," Clara said, gently turning her cup. "I used to think I was weak, but not anymore." I reached for her hand across the table. "We were never weak, Clara. We were just deceived. But that's over now." We laughed, our voices rising in the warm space of the cafe, like a shared affirmation that our lives were now our own. And I was stronger than ever. Each evening, I cooked for myself, not to serve someone else, but to enjoy it. The scent of roasted herbs filled my small apartment, a reminder that I deserved good things. My career at the design firm flourished. I got promoted, not because of luck, but because I proved I had the talent and resilience. I was no longer the timid girl who once walked into Andrew's house with a bottle of wine and a hesitant smile. I was Sarah, the woman who faced betrayal, brought it down, and walked out stronger than ever. But the most remarkable ending came one morning, when I received an unexpected message from Kate, the woman who had once been engaged to Andrew. She wrote, "Sarah, I don't know what to say except thank you. You saved me from a mistake I never saw coming. I left the ring behind. I left Connecticut, and now I'm back in school in Boston. You're stronger than I imagined, and I won't forget that." I read her message, sitting quietly by the window, sunlight streaming through the leaves outside, and a strange feeling rose in me, not triumph, but peace. My actions didn't just free me and Clara. They were like a stone thrown into water, sending ripples outward, touching even those like Kate whom I'd never expected to reach. They, Andrew, Margaret, Victor, once thought I was easy to manipulate, that I was just a pawn in their game. But they forgot that I wasn't the pawn. I was the player, the one who flipped the board and walked away with my head held high. At 33, I hadn't just found myself again. I became a quiet flame of inspiration, not loud or boastful, but warm enough to ignite those who had been hurt like me. I didn't need revenge to feel victorious. I won by living, by standing tall and free, leaving behind not just the ruins of their downfall, but the rise of my own story, one I still smile at whenever I remember, because I know I achieved what none of them ever dreamed possible. I became free, and I made that freedom echo.